All right. Yes, my name, as he mentioned, as Bill mentioned, my name is Bass. I'm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, so about an hour north of Philly, and I've been growing figs for the past 20 some years. One of my first house I got, first tree I planted was a fig tree, and that's you'll see that a lot in immigrants from Mediterranean region that grew up with figs. You will see a fig tree in their yard. A lot of Italians and Greeks, Portuguese, Middle Easterns. I grew up in Lebanon, which blessed with figs, the perfect climate for figs there. So that was what first thing I planted was a fig tree, and as you see here, it's my nursery. I started got into it became a nursery. It started as a passion and wanting to know what fig varieties would grow best for my area. First tree I planted didn't do well for me, and I kept looking for varieties that ripens early enough, that bears plenty of figs and so on. So I started exchanging with other people. That was back in early 2000, and later on, I started getting more and more figs, and so I built a small greenhouse, and from that greenhouse, it expanded, and people wanted to start to buy from me, and I started selling plants, and it became a registered nursery, and then I ran out of room, and I moved to a bigger property, built a bigger greenhouse, and there I am. I have all the fig varieties here that I have. So Trees of Joy, maybe some of you may have seen my website or even visited me up here. So why figs? Why do people grow figs, and why should we consider growing figs? I mean, first of all, they're delicious, and they're best eaten fresh. So it's not the best tasting when you go buy it from a market, from a supermarket. They don't taste as good. They're not picked when they're fully ripe, and they don't have that flavor. So there's nothing like a freshly picked fig, and they're relatively easy to grow in general. A lot easier than they don't require spraying. They only need some winter protection because of the climate they're from. So they thrive in dry and long hot summers. Like ideal location here in the States is California. Obviously, it's mimicking the Mediterranean climate where they're from. But it doesn't mean that we can't grow them here. So we are limited to certain types of figs, certain varieties that do not require the time to ripen. So in the figs, they vary from one variety to another. I compare them to people hasn't had figs that are they didn't know there was so many varieties of figs. Well, they vary. It's just like sampling wine. Like wine has one flavor, one has a different flavor, different color, and also every year some wine they have a different flavor. Same thing with figs. Some years they don't taste as good as some others. When it's a long and dry summer, low humidity, that's when they're superb. They like full sun. They don't ripen off the tree, so you can't pick it and wait till it to ripen. You can't do that with figs. So, and we've probably seen them. They're ripe when they change color and they droop. They're droopy, like something like this. That sometimes they have a crack on the skin. That's when they're ready to be picked. Some of them, they start oozing honey from the eye, from the bottom there. That's when they're at their best, to me at least. That's how I like them. They're very soft, and they have to be eaten in the same day when you pick them at that point. So it's a good idea to point out the types of figs. The reason for that is there are 4 different types here. There's a common type, and that's the type that you see mostly planted here and planted everywhere else. There's also a variety called Smyrna, type of fig called Smyrna, which is it's a female fig. It would only ripen if it's pollinated. And the Capri fig is also known as the male fig. So they don't produce edible figs. They produce figs that their main purpose is to pollinate those Smyrna type or common types. And then there's one called San Pedro, which actually has 2 crops. The first crop, with a Breva crop, I will talk a bit about that. That ripens without pollination, and then there's a main crop that drops off and will not ripen. So let me just go over that real quick again. Common fig, so popular varieties like Brown Turkey, Hardy Chicago, Celeste, those are all common type. Within the common type, there's 2 types. There's one called Unifera, means it only has one main crop, and Bifera, which makes a Breva crop, which is the first crop that's ripens on that's formed on last year's wood. So if there's no winter dieback and the variety is a Bifera type, it will have figs forming from last year's wood, but those are not reliable in cold climate. So St. Pedro, one of the famous St. Pedro varieties called Desert King. This is popular in Seattle, Washington, like on the West Coast, because they have a short summer, cool summer, and also they don't have a really cold winter like we do. So the wood does not die back, but they form the last year's wood. So this one variety called St. Pedro. I just wanted to mention these varieties because some people will be tempted to grow something that they've seen overseas, like in Europe or in California, that does perfectly fine there. But when you bring it over here to Pennsylvania, it's not gonna work out. So keep an eye on that. There's somebody who mentioned Calimyrna. Calimyrna is actually a Smyrna type. It requires pollination. And the thing with the pollination, we don't have the wasp in this area. It doesn't survive in the cold. There's a specific, you've probably seen videos about the fig wasp. It's a very tiny insect that goes from the Capri fig, the male figs, that pollinate the figs. We don't have that here. So they will not produce any figs. Smyrna figs would basically, if you plant a fig, you'll see the figs forming, they'll stay green, and then they shrivel and fall off before they actually ripen. So I just wanted to bring that up. Any questions so far on this topic? All right. All right, so the suitable varieties for us for the Northeast is the common fig only, so which is the self-fertile, like we mentioned. It's the St. Pedro varieties, like the ones that will only ripen the Breva crop. Those are, they can be grown here. Some years, if it's a mild year in the ground, they're perfectly fine. They will form the Breva. But it's not reliable. If you have them in a container growing, you will see those figs forming as right before even the leaves start. You see figs starting to come up on the branches. So I also look for early ripening varieties because this is important. We don't have a long season, so by the time they die, if there's dieback in the winter time, by the time they sprout and they start forming figs, if you don't see figs starting to form on the tree by mid-June or even early July at the latest, you're not gonna see figs ripening in time before September, October. Also look for varieties that are resistant to splitting and something that's vigorous, that grows very fast enough. So just pointing that out because I've seen We have a lot of varieties. People ask me why is my tree is not growing? My tree is not forming any figs. And find out it's something they got from California. That's does very wonderful over there, but here it's just not suitable. So keep that in mind if you're growing a fig variety. And I also I've been looking. I look around for varieties that have done wonderful here. I've been collecting these varieties that I also have in my greenhouse in my nursery. So growing in the area here. So in general, figs are hardy to about 12 degrees Fahrenheit. The thing is, the roots of the fig trees are very hardy. They can withstand the cold weather. You know, I've seen it survive -15. You know, in other words, the top will die, and then the roots they actually protected in the ground. They would stand up to -15 degrees. That's pretty cold. So you'll see that trees, and that's if it's an established tree. If it's a young tree that's planted in the same year, went through this cold, this probably won't come back. But if it's something that's established, -15 is probably they could survive, and the root system will survive that cold. The best spot to plant it, to face, to withstand the cold, is facing south. So south facing wall. And the best type of walls, actually, you have that a lot in Philly, is a brick wall. Bricks basically attract heat, and they kind of, give it some micro climate. It creates that microclimate for the fig tree. It gives off heat in the wintertime even. So also, it's very popular, and I have most of my trees are in containers, and they're overwintered in my greenhouse. But most people will not have a greenhouse there. So if you have a garage, a barn, anything with a cold storage. Some people, I've seen people put it in a shed, but shed sometimes is too cold. But in a barn, a garage, unheated garage. In basements, it's tricky because see people bring them down to the basement and they sprout really early. And if they sprout in the basement where there's no light, the tree will start growing leaves with no, they're really pale white. And you take it out, they got sunburned and they don't make it. So that's another option there. This is the most popular option for fig growers in colder climate, is just growing them in containers. They're fairly easy to grow, and they're also productive. So they can produce figs within a year or two. I like this idea how this person had them to just mulch around them to keep them growing. The thing with this is the roots will actually go through the pot into the ground. But in the fall, you just need to cut off that root off and just drag it in. But we're doing it this way is you don't need to water it as much. It will stay happy. So another idea. So you want to start with a 1 gallon container and move it up gradually, just because you don't want to put a small tiny fig in a big pot. It just has more moisture that can actually, and it's not going to like the moisture in it. So obviously you just want to start small and move it up to a large container. You could go up to a half a barrel, something that's manageable that you could move around in and out. So it's really no limit on what size you put it in, but as long as you move it, that will grow. So you can see how productive this tree is. It's in a small pot, and it produces a lot of figs. So there are some advantages to it. Obviously, is winter protection is one of them. You could easily just overwinter them. They don't have dieback when you do that, and they're great for limited spaces. People that have they just have a small garden, they don't have a room to plant it. They could put it in a porch. it's bears sooner actually. So versus the ground, for some reason, having it in the constrained space there with the root system, it actually starts bearing sooner. You could also strain it as a standard shape. Growing them in the ground, they tend to grow as bushes, and big bushes with multiple trunks, and can grow out of control. In a pot, you could just make it as a standard single trunk shape. Some people prefer that. The disadvantage of it, though, is the watering. It's sometimes it's hard to gauge the watering. You don't want to overwater it. When you do, and the figs they don't ripen, they split. They have splitting issues if it's overwatered. And you could kill the roots, obviously, if it's watered way too much. And fertilizing, so you got to also keep fertilizing it properly. You don't want to over fertilize it or not fertilize it at all. We'll talk more about fertilizer, but basically, yeah, anyone has a question on growing figs in pots?
I had a question about being hardy to 12 degrees. Does that mean when it drops below 12 degrees, it starts to like kill off the branches above?
Yes, that's basically the branches, the wood itself is, I mean, I said 12 degrees, that's just basically an average. Between 10 to 15 degrees is basically where I've seen them. When I see the forecast is around that time, around that range. That's when, in the spring you see that's all brown. So yeah, and this is, around the tree. Now that the tree planted against the wall, like I was talking about the heat of giving off the wall, it's actually warmer than that, than what you see in the forecast. That makes sense.
Bess, we had a question. What kind of soil mix do you recommend for potted figs?
Good question. So with the potted figs, yeah, you don't want to keep it too dry, too heavy. You don't want to mix soil from the ground, because you're introducing diseases and all kind of nematodes and stuff in the ground soil. So potting mix, I mean, if you have just a few potted figs, I buy it commercially. It's already pre-mixed for me. But what it is you could buy like potting mix bags, something like Miracle Grow. They're pre-mixed already. You could buy a cheaper brand, a Miracle Grow fertilizer. You might, if you don't want to use their fertilizer. So potting mix, you want to add something to make it more porous. You could add coarse sand, like builder sand. Builder sand, not the fine sand. That's a thicker sand. So you add. So just here's like a formula that I would use. For example, a big bag of 1 part potting mix, 1 part perlite, or actually two parts potting mix, 1 part perlite, 1 part coarse sand, just in general. So that's a good mix for bigger fig trees as well. So again, 2 parts potting mix already mixed in. The potting mix, it has pine bark, peat moss, has cocoa coir. So it's already pre-mixed, all those ingredients. But if you could amend it, add perlites and a builder sand or a coarse sand.
And we had one other question.
Sure.
About how long you can keep a fig in a pot before planting in the ground, or moving it to a bigger pot.
Okay, so like I said, you start with 1 gallon. I sell my trees in 1 gallon. They come in 1 gallon. They grow pretty fast. I mean, within a month, if it's early in this, like in the spring, like right now, a month later, you could actually put it in a 3 gallon or 5 gallon. and then by the end of the summer, you already could put it in a bigger pot, big enough pot. Well, let's talk about 30 gallon. So how long can it be in a pot? Indefinitely. I mean, as long as you want to, you could actually, you have to prune it. You have to prune the roots and the branches at the same time. Once every 2-3 years, you could do that. So you could prune it sooner if you like. Repot it sooner. So when I say pruning the roots, is you take it out, cut off the roots. You want to do that obviously in the dormant season, not when it has leaves. So you take it out, you cut off about 2/3 of the root system. At the same time, you want to prune the top just to keep it in balance. Put new soil, pot it back in, and let it grow back again. So it can be, can be kept in a pot indefinitely as long as it could keep up with that regime.
Another question from Mino. Would you add any compost to the soil mix?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, compost if it's nice and fertile, it adds fertility to it. So you can. I've used compost mixed with I keep chicken, so the chicken compost to it a little bit, though you don't want to overdo it. That will kill the root. So, but yeah, just I think a little bit actually would be beneficial of compost. Sure.
Okay, one more question before we continue presentation. What are your feelings about? You talked about planting by a south-facing wall. Do you have any thoughts about planting against the wall of a house? I know some people have concerns about the roots possibly damaging the basement, things like that.
I don't think it would be that big of a impact on the structure in our climate in the in the Middle East or Mediterranean region. Yeah, but fig trees will penetrate through the rocks. They're really, the roots are pretty bad in ideal climate. In our area, I think it's not, it wouldn't be a concern. I mean, I would plant it about 5 feet away, maybe. It doesn't have to be exactly against the wall, but yeah, about 5 feet away from the wall would probably be okay. But yeah, for the most part, I've never seen it do any damages in our area at all.
Great. All right. Well, I guess we'll take another break later on for more questions.
Sure. All right. And all right. So planting in the ground. So I was mentioning you choose a sunny and sheltered spot. They love the sun, and they love to be sheltered in the wintertime. So the best time to plant them is in spring. And I would, if it's the tree that's already leafed out, I wouldn't plant it yet until usually around Mother's Day. It's safe enough. Avoid planting it in a spot where soils remains wet. So there are places where there's like wet spots. Does not like that at all. Needs good drainage. Yeah, as I said, south-facing wall, and again, the brick walls are like fantastic because the heat it gives off is great. In the winter time, now keep in mind I'm in Allentown area, Bethlehem. It's about an hour north of you. It gets colder where I am. In my area, yes, they definitely have to be wrapped up. In Philly, I've seen them both. They do survive without being wrapped up fine. If it's in a sheltered spot, in a good spot. If it's out in an open, more of an open spot, yeah, you definitely want to keep them protected. There's a gentleman, Italian guy in Bethlehem that I went to visit. He has a tree that is about, I would say, about 15 feet tall, and he spends a whole day working with two guys. They basically cut the roots off on one side of the tree, and they just tilt the whole tree down to the ground, and it's about 15 feet. I just can't imagine. And the trunk is about 1.5 feet thick. They bend the whole tree down every fall. They cover it with leaves, mulch, whatever it is, and they resurrect it back again in the spring. And that tree, man, it's like you could climb it. It's huge. So that's a method here. I mean, I'm not saying you could to get it that big, but yeah, you could. And the large trees should be wrapped. You can't bend them when they're that big. When they're young, it's easy enough to just bend them to the ground. So this is just an example here. Best time to do that, to wrap the fig tree, is around Thanksgiving. In November, that's when temperatures constantly stay cold. You don't want to wrap it too early or when it still have leaves on it. And this is the best time to prune it. Pruning the tree here, you want to do that when it's dormant. So to me, around the time you want to wrap it, that's the best time to actually prune the fig tree. If you're not pruning it, if you're not wrapping it, you could prune it later on, right before spring. So what you do is you prune it to manageable size, anywhere from 4 to 8 feet. You want to select about 3 to 4 branches there and make those as the leaders. This is a small tree that in the picture here. I just wanted to show that as an example. You tie the branches together. What I've been experimenting with the past 3-4 years now, I wanted to add more heat and insulate it because it's been getting really cold in my area. So I've been used a heating cable. That's the stuff they use around pipes so they don't freeze. And it has a thermostat that kicks in when it's 35 degrees or colder, and it shuts off around 50 degrees. So it's perfect. So it doesn't stay warm, doesn't stay too hot, only there when it's needed. So yeah, the heating cable really worked very well for me. So you tie it together, and then I wrap it with the cable. That's another small tree here. Again, you could see it probably was about 5 to 5 years old, maybe. So as you see this tree here, I thin it out to about 3 to 4 main trunks. Thin it out there, and you wrap it, tie it together. And you could use a piece of carpet around it, makes it, bundle it nicely. Now, around this time, you want to make sure you're going to be inviting mice to live in this bundle of warm and pleasant comfort. It makes it as a mice hotel, basically what I like to call it, because I've had issues with mice. I'm sure people who grew figs and wrapped them up have seen mice damage to the fig tree. So what you do to keep mice away, around the time when I wrap it like this, I put mothballs, which are the small white stuff. Mothballs keeps mice out. Some people put poison blocks, but I don't like them because I have cats and I don't like animals, eating them. So anyways, keep that in mind about mice. On top of that, I put another layer of a plastic tarp. So again, doing this when it's really cold. You don't want to. It doesn't like when it's the sun hits it and warming up in the winter time. Or maybe in the fall, if it's too early, it's going to get really cold, really warm inside. I meant. And the other thing is you want to unwrap it early enough so it doesn't risk molding, because if you leave this on until I've seen people keep them on till May. When they unwrap it, it's basically all moldy because with the bundle like this and constantly the sun is hitting it, it's over 100 degrees inside and it's moist. So as you see here, I unwrap it in the middle of March. So I unwrap my in-ground fig tree. So this is a fig orchard in cold climate. This is actually in Allentown. you could see all the the tree bundled up. This man here that does that, he's originally from Syria, and he invites all his friends to come eat figs during the summer month, but in the fall they all come and help him out, bundle them all up. But they do wonderfully. I mean, he takes care of them, and could see he's in a somewhat of a microclimate. There's close to other houses, between houses there, so it's like in the row homes of Allentown. Here's another bundled fig tree. Here's the mice damage I was talking about. Is you see, when you unwrap it, you could run into issues with mice like that. And splitting is also another issue here that we run into with the varieties that you're growing. You got to make sure I look for varieties that don't have an open eye at the bottom. The eye is inviting moisture in, and they split. They only split really when it's raining heavily and it's around when they're about to ripen. That's when they really does the damage. Any questions so far about growing figs in the ground?
There's nothing in the chat so far,
Okay.
but this is great. Thank you.
Do you have any advice for the mice damage? We've seen that at a few sites, especially after a snowy winter. It seems to be easier for the mice to get to the figs. I don't know.
Are they wrapped figs you were talking about, or they're just open
yeah
up? Okay.
We often put up fencing and stuff it with fall leaves as our method, which I think is nice mice habitat.
Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. It makes it a mice hotel basically over winter. The best things, like I said, the mothballs really does work for mice. Mothballs, you could just put they come in like little pouches of bags. Put them around the trunk when you wrap it, or you put in leaves, and then the way it is there, will keep them out. And then clean it out and take it off in the spring.
I do have a comment about this. In regard to the mice. I don't have to do this anymore because Mr. Cat has taken care of that problem. But
there you go.
so we used to take what is that plastic? It almost looks like edging, and you wrap it around the base of fruit trees to stop the mice from biting them. And we used to wrap that up along the stem, and like I said, we don't have to do it anymore, but it did work. So I don't know, that might be another option.
Yeah, I've seen actually people wrap it with aluminum foil.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a friend that he had the mice damage in his garage over winter. So he wraps it with aluminum foil. That actually stopped them, because plastic they could chew, aluminum foil not so much. But they do have sharp teeth.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just
There's a couple more questions just
Yeah.
about one, what does pop do? And we encourage our partners to wrap, and like Phil was saying, we do the fencing with leaves. It seems to be an easy way for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But we're supporting the orchard, so in the end they do whatever they want and have capacity to do. But somebody wanted to know if there's any varieties that don't require wrapping that you know
of. So when we talk about you'll see an advertisement about cold hardy fig variety. To me, there is no not necessarily cold hardiness, but more of a reliability, like I mentioned, early ripening and vigorous. So, like for example, Chicago Hardy. They named it Chicago Hardy because someone in Chicago area actually had the tree growing, and they took cuttings and they called it Chicago Hardy, and that's became the name. But it's not really hardy. It dies back. Anything below 15 degrees, they're gonna get damaged. Some fig, I mean, there are some, few degrees here and there that actually can resist the cold a little bit better than others, but still you'll see dieback. So there's no perfectly hardy cold hardy fig tree for our area. So they all have years where they could get damaged. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, if you grow a fig variety that actually reliable, even with some cold damage, they could send new shoots and they will bear fruit the same year. So winter cold hardiness is not a problem anymore because they'll be vigorous enough, they will fruit the same year. That answers the question.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll just add that overall, most figs at pop orchards don't get wrapped most years. We're a little warmer here than Bethlehem,
Yeah.
and most winters will have, many winters will have no damage. Some winters will have a small amount of damage. Occasionally we'll have enough cold that it might impact production, but we're mostly planting, like Bass said, varieties that are quick to fruit. So even if they have some dieback, they'll still have the crop.
Yeah, you always I mean, I look for varieties that actually has done well here. There's many unknown varieties, and I've introduced many varieties to the public that has done really well in my climate. And if they do good in a cold climate, we know they'll do it. In most other states, they'll do fine. So ideally, I mean, probably zone 6, I would say, is the limit for growing them outside in the ground. Zone 5 is a struggle. I know people in Scranton, up the mountains there, they planted fig trees, but they gotta really protect them over winter. They have to bend it to the ground and bury it every year for them to actually grow well. So yeah, so I would say zone 6. You guys in Philly, about zone 7 there. It's definitely a better winter suited down there.
We have more questions, but we could save some for the end, or do you want to keep answering questions now?
If it's is it related to this?
There's some questions about pruning.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned pruning. Yeah, what's the question? Fine.
The question, oh, now I lost it. I have a large fig tree that needs to be pruned now. How do I reduce the damage since the ends are starting to bud and it's coming out of dormancy?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the shape of the tree and how big it is. If you did not protect it and you see dieback now, I like to wait to see like what died. You will be able to tell like a brownish color that's dead. You could cut it off. You don't want to keep it too crowded because in the summertime, I mean, you want all the branches to have exposure to the sun and the air exposure also, because you don't want it to stay too humid in there. So you could reduce it. Again, it's not too late to still reduce it and cut off. First, you want to cut off the dead branches and reduce the trunks to like 3 or 4 main leaders, like I mentioned. Yeah, I mean, keep them spaced out enough that there's enough sun that will penetrate and that will help with ripening the figs.
Okay, someone else, Jane asked, so every 2 to 3 years for potted figs, roots and trees should be pruned. Should the pot and soil also be changed each time this happens?
Yes, absolutely. You want to put new soil mix because all the nutrients are absorbed. So you want something fresh soil every time you repot it.
Great. And then how do we go about overwintering in the garage? Do they want to be near a window? Do they want light? Do they need water?
In the winter time, and if the pot, I would say 1 gallon pots, they don't do well overwintering in a cold garage. I would say at least move it to 3 to 5 gallon pot. Yeah, just to gives it enough room, more moisture. It does not require a lot of watering. They don't drink in the wintertime. They don't, suck up the water much. There's 2 ways to keep it watered. You could either put it in a saucer dish of water. There's water at the bottom, so when it's needed, actually use up some of the water there. But I would only water it if it's just a big pot. I would only water it like once every. Honestly, I only watered maybe every month. So if it's a big pot, you just water once a month. You got, when you put it in, you water it, let it sit there. Again, later, December, January, February, you start watering more frequently as wants to start to wake up. So yeah, you water very little over winter.
Awesome. I think that's all our questions for right now.
All right. So varieties. There's tons of varieties of figs, as you see, different colors, different shapes. What's important though, keep in mind is you've got to be a common fig. And again, most varieties that we have are common figs. Had people tell me that they got a fig from their grandfather from Italy, but over there it makes delicious figs. Here they just don't do well. Again, most likely it just ripens late, or if it's not a common type that requires that pollination I spoke about. So I always look for varieties that ripen well. And if you see a variety, if you see a fig, if you have a family member or so on that has a fig that's fruiting well, you could just go and get clippings off of it. That would be suited for your area more. But this is a very common one I was speaking about. It's a hardy Chicago. It's in the category. It's called a Mount Etna type fig. There's a lot of figs in that category. So the nice thing about them is they die back. They could grow back. They could potentially. They're very early main crop, and early enough. I wouldn't say very early, but early enough that they would ripen for us here in the climate. This is another variety that I introduced called Dark Portuguese. Also very reliable for me, at least. This is right now the only tree that I wrap and I pay attention to because it's very productive for me and does very well. This is a variety I introduced also called Black Bethlehem. It's usually in August I pick figs from it. And LSU, Louisiana State University, had a breeding program back, I believe in the 60s, 50s, 60s. They introduced varieties that they had a breeding program where they took a variety, the Celeste fig, which is very common down south. One of the most common variety down south. They call it by mountain figs. They call it sugar fig, but it's called Celeste. It's very sweet like candy. So they took that as the parent and they bred it by taking pollen from a male, and it's very complex. And they planted all varieties, and they selected all these varieties from it. So you will see it today. There's tons of varieties from the LSU program. So there's starting at the top, there's one called Tiger, and then there's O'Rourke. And you could see the nice thing about them, you could see there at the bottom, they have a tight eye, which, it holds, it resists rain better than some varieties, than most varieties. So all these varieties are from the LSU breeding program. I really like them. They're sweet, they're early enough. I visited an orchard in New Orleans last summer and got to try all these varieties. They start ripening down there, and like in beginning of July, they have figs, tons of figs out there, and they keep. The problem is it rains and it's very humid, so the LSU varieties seems to be well suited for that. This is another variety I introduced called Brooklyn White. The only thing with this is it ripens later than hardy Chicago and dark Portuguese. But man, when it ripens, it's amazing. It's very productive. It makes two crops. The first crop is a huge pear-shaped fig, and the main crop, that's from the main crop, and it produces heavily also. That's the Breba, the first crop, and like I said, it's not reliable in our area because of the dieback, but when it does set, they're big and delicious. Any questions on varieties? All right.
Okay, yeah, we got a question. I have a pretty established tree about 10 years old, 8 feet tall. I stopped wrapping because of the size of the branches. I do cover it with leaves about 3 feet up. Concerned about noticing tree roots appearing on lawn and wondering if they will get damaged by lawn mowing. Should I cover the roots?
So the roots of the fig tree are popping up. I mean, I don't think it's a problem. Yeah, I mean, you could mow it. It's not. I don't think it's gonna get bothered at all. I wouldn't worry about it, honestly. You could, mow the tree. You could cut off that root. The tree, I'm sure, has more established root. Will send new shoots there. No, I don't think it's a problem.
Great. I think we can keep going.
All right. Propagation. So figs are in general are like one of the easiest fruit trees to propagate because they are propagated from cuttings. It's the foolproof, I would say. So suckers is probably the easiest method that you could see with figs. So the fig bush, you will see multiple trunks. The easiest thing to do is just cut off one of the suckers, one of the side trunks with some roots attached to it, and plant and pot it up, and that's a tree by itself. Air layering method is when you actually put a bag or a pot around the trunk, cut off a little of the bark, and fill it up with peat moss. Keep it moist. And that will actually get rooted, and you could cut it off, and that's potted up as a separate one. And then there's just the most common one, just rooting cuttings. The suckers is best time to dig them are either in fall or spring when the tree is dormant. If it has a green shoots and you dig up that green shoot, chances of survival is very, very low. Using a shovel, you could just dig up a sucker with the roots and pot it up, and there you go, and you have another tree. That's honestly one of the easiest way to reproduce this variety of fig tree. Air layering. So this is done during the growing season. As I mentioned here, you shave off a little bit of the bark, put the cup around it, and usually it takes about a month to have enough roots. This is the most common propagation in Asia. We have a lot of fig growers actually right now in Thailand and Malaysia. That's all they do is root them by air layering. It's warm enough there, and the tree keeps growing. So the cuttings don't go dormant, that they could grow them easily by cutting. So they do it when it's warm, and you could only do this anyways when it's warm enough for it to root. The other way is just take a branch of the tree and just bend it all the way to the ground, and just put a pile of soil about 6 inch deep, and that will actually send root, and you just cut it off in the fall. And that's also another method. But what I do, I root the cuttings. I just take cuttings of branches from current year's wood in the fall. I take them in the fall. Obviously, you just don't want it to die back over winter, so I take them in the fall. I save them in a Ziploc over winter, and then I start rooting them in this way. As you see here, I use a mixture of perlite and potting mix. I would say about 50-50 potting mix and perlites. So I take about a cutting that it's about I would say 6 to 8 inches, 10 inches maybe. I need something that has at least 3 buds. So I select a cutting with 3 buds, and I cover 2/3 of it in the ground or in the soil, and then and that's it. And they within a month they're rooted. So this is my 1 part perlite, 1 part potting mix. It's important to keep it warm enough and humid around it to actually root. Inside the house, if there's not enough humidity, maybe you want to add it under cover. Also, you could add a heating mat under it to actually get the roots established. I don't use any rooting hormones or anything like that. They're just dormant cuttings, 3 buds, put them in the soil, and that's it. But there's tons of methods of rooting. They're rooting them. People root them in water, which I don't recommend. The roots in the water are very fragile. When you take it out of the water and try to plant it back, they just don't grow well most of the time. And what else? There's really different ways. There people just wrap them in a moist paper towel, put them in Ziploc, and put them somewhere warm, and they just have roots growing everywhere. It's just different ways of doing it. You look online, there's hundreds of ways to root them, but really they're really easy. Now, another way to do it, you just don't want to bother with it, and it's more foolproof. Just take the cuttings in the fall, cut them to decent pieces. If you have a garden bed, for example, just bury them about a foot deep in the ground and cover them in soil. In the spring, they have roots and they're sprouting. You could dig them out and pot them up. So I've done them both ways. It works very well. And this is in mostly perlite. You could see that they fill up the pot really quickly. That's another way of doing it. You can do that with dormant cuttings as well, or summer cuttings. This is in the middle of the summer. A branch broke off of a favorite tree that I have that I didn't want to lose. So I've done this way as well. So in the potting mix as well, I would say the potting mix would be just a regular potting mix, adds a little perlite to it. It's a little bit more difficult to keep them alive because they're green. So you take the clippings, about 8 inches, 2/3 of them there in the soil, and about you take off all the leaves off of it, basically clip off all the leaves, and then I create like a greenhouse effect. I put a stick, like a bamboo stick, in the middle, take a bag on top of it, cover it all up. You water it once. You just water it and cover the whole thing. Put a rubber band just to keep it around the pot, to keep it nice and tight. You don't want to put this in the sun though, even though it creates that sun, like I said, greenhouse effect. You don't want to put that in the sun because the heat buildup will be really bad. So I put it under a bench in my greenhouse, or away from the sun, or in a shady spot that is actually warm. When I say warm, I'm talking about 80 degrees, between 70 and 80 degrees or so. That's done in the summertime, so you have that option. And 3 to 4 weeks, they have roots and they have leaves and they're rooted. And I do that a lot with many trees. I do that with kiwis. I've done that with just different trees that can be rooted that way. Any questions on rooting cuttings or rooting figs, or starting or propagating in general?
Would you use the same 50-50 perlite potting mix for summer cuttings?
I think they'll need more moisture.
Mm.
So you're not constantly watering them. So I watered it once. Would water it just one time, cover it up, leave it there for like I would say check on it 2 weeks later. It does not dry up. That's why. So more moisture, I think, would be okay. So yeah, I would say maybe 3 to 1, three parts soil mix to 1 perlite.
Cool. And I think you said Mother's Day, but someone just asked, when can young potted trees be put outside?
Yeah, after danger of frost, basically. Up here, it's middle of May, so that's why I'm saying Mother's Day a little bit before, maybe in the Philly area. Just keep an eye for the weather forecast for frost. You don't want to get it hit by frost after you plant it.
Great. And that's all the questions for right now.
All right. Just want to touch about grafting also figs. It's not very common and it requires a lot of skill to actually be able to graft a fig tree. It's not recommended for in-ground trees because if you graft a tree and then there's a dieback, the tree is going to grow back from the bottom below the graft. So what's the point of grafting it then? The thing about why would you want to graft a fig tree? I have a tree in my greenhouse that has maybe 3 varieties grafted on it. Just because it's in the greenhouse, in the ground in the greenhouse, and I needed that spot. There are some varieties too that are very weak. They're very weak growing on their own, or they're more difficult to root. So that's where grafting comes in. There's one variety called the Black Madeira. It's not something that I would recommend for the ground in the area anyways, but it makes delicious figs, and it's very poor grower. So I grafted it on a vigorous tree that I have in the ground in the greenhouse, and boy, it puts out tons of figs and grows nicely. And I said risky because I was at a grafting workshop teaching grafting in Lancaster a couple of years ago, and this told them how to hold the knife properly, make sure you cut away from your fingers. So this person cuts off his finger. I actually cut my finger the first time I grafted trees. So it's risky. It's not, if you're not used to it, if not something you've done before, practice on it slowly on a branch before you do that grafting. And grafting can only be done and within a small window, meaning that only when the branch that you're grafting is actually dormant and the tree is just breaking dormancy. Like you don't want to do it in the middle of the summer. So just and I recommend this more for like a potted tree. So if a potted tree that you just don't like the fig, it's not producing, and you want to reproduce that a branch of cuttings that you have. You could just root that cutting, but you could just start a new variety by just grafting over. Those different methods that I've done of grafting, all these pictures I've taken myself. So over the years, I don't know all the names of these methods, but like you split it and you could put the cutting in on the left there. There's a bud grafting, so you could take a bud of a dormant cutting and just attach it, and then on the one on the right is placing the cutting right there. Thing with the grafting, the main thing is you want to do is match the cambium. The cambium is the green part here at the edge of the cutting that you're seeing there. That if you attach the cambiums together, that's what needed, and then they fuse together, and then it forms. It starts growing. So the cutting will actually use the sap from the mother tree, and then they fuse together, becoming a tree. So this is a cutting that I grafted a year later. I use a rubber band there to keep it tight. Again, grafting, this is something that it would be more of a hands-on thing to show you exactly how it's done. So I just wanted to, I'm just touching on it basically. This is a year or two later also. You could see how they fuse together once they're grafted. Any questions now? I could take any question you want regarding everything I mentioned or something I did not mention.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. First, going back to propagation, when should you remove the plastic from the cuttings? When you make the little greenhouse?
Yeah, that was about 3 to 4 weeks later. So you want to do that, like I said, during the summer months, so June, July, I would say you would do that, and then take it off. Mid August, you take it off. It's fine if it's leafed out. Just and then you could separate them then, or actually wait till like later when it's cooler, a little cooler, and you could separate them to individual potted plants.
And the same person is saying after the cutting is leafed out, their leaves are drying up and falling off. And is that normal?
After cutting is rooted?
After it leaves out, and feel free to unmute yourself if you want to, whoever asked this question. But after it leaves out, the leaves fall off. That's not normal, right?
Not normal, no. That means it's the cutting is drying out. So it happens a lot after it's rooted, and if it's transplanted, yeah, it could potentially happen. It happens a lot. Just important to keep it not overly watered, because too much water also can rot. The roots can get rotted, but keep it humid enough that the leaves can actually, because the leaves, they take a lot of they need enough moisture, but it's also critical with the roots. It's just too sensitive to too much water. They need moisture and aeration. Aeration is the oxygen in the soil. So if the soil is too wet, so they need the moisture, but if it's too wet and there's no aeration there in the soil, that's the reason why they do fail.
And how often should the trees be fertilized? What time of year? How much?
So fertilizer is different between ground trees versus potted figs. Potted figs, I use slow release fertilizer like Osmocote. You could find that everywhere. But if you want, Osmocote, I like it because it's just once in the spring, and you don't have to keep applying it. You add enough, like about 1 tablespoon per 1 gallon of soil. And they're slow release, so they're always there. But obviously, the bigger pot, you want to add more. If you want to go more of an organic version, you could use fish emulsion. Fish emulsion works great, but you gotta be very, very careful with it. It's just you gotta go half of the recommended what they recommend on their label. So I've had issues with them, like stunting the tree. It's actually won't allow it to grow. Also used from my chickens. I use the compost from my chicken around the bigger trees or the trees in the ground. Yeah, that works really well. Actually, they give up enough nitrogen. So in general, fig trees requires a lot of nitrogen because they have large leaves. So high nitrogen. So like a formula that I use for trees is 3-1-2. So look for a 3-1-2 formula in general for fertilizer.
Great. Another question is, if you're pruning a large branch on an in-ground tree down to the ground or base, how close to the ground would you cut?
Doesn't matter. I mean, they could it won't damage the tree, the main tree much if you prune it low enough. So if you don't prune it low enough, it's gonna send new shoots, obviously from the buds. You're gonna see little buds there. So you don't want anything growing. I would do it as close as you want to the ground or to the main trunk.
Is there anything we can do to improve the taste of a fig? And also, your website shows 48 varieties. What would you say are the tastiest ones or the easiest ones to grow?
So, all right. So to improve the flavor, I mean, if the variety is what it is, that you can't really change much about the characteristics. The flavor does change though with I would mention about the humidity. So if we have periods of low humidity, not enough rain, not a lot of rain, that really gonna help improve the flavor of the figs. I'm talking about in-ground figs. In the pot, you don't want to overwater it and you don't want to underwater it. So you got to keep it just enough for it to grow those figs and sets those figs up, because too much water will spoil it, really spoil the flavor. The more sun you give it, the better. So if it's in a shady spot, the figs are probably not gonna be as good. Improve so mention about varieties. I honestly, it's kind of like if you have a family with all those kids, which one is your favorite kid? That's how I look at it. But I actually, I mean, if you depends how you're gonna grow it. If you're gonna grow something in a pot, you really have so many options. You could go with all the LSU varieties I mentioned, they're really sweet. They inherit, the parent is the Celeste, which is really sweet flavor. There's also one of my favorites there in the ground, like dark Portuguese, black Bethlehem. Brooklyn White is really, really nice. Has that honey flavor. There are varieties though that actually have a stunning jammy, like strawberry jam on the inside, like one variety called Verte. So I don't have that on the website. There's one from the island of Crete. It's really jammy on red on the inside. I also have one I just simply call it Bass Favorite because it's my favorite. The thing with that tree is not recommended in the ground yet. Just haven't trialed it how cold hardy it is or how well it performs outside. It's probably more for potted figs. So I hope that answers that question.
And the last question was, can I propagate from hardwood cuttings?
Yes, absolutely. Hardwood cuttings, if it's dormant, you could take the cuttings fall or spring. If it's taken in the spring, I mean, if there's dieback, you will be able to tell. I mean, if it's you got to make sure it's nice and green, can be in there that when you take a cutting. That's what I usually do is hardwood cuttings is what you do.
All right, another one just came in. I have a fig tree that was in a container for 10 plus years and I recently transplanted it into the ground. The main tree did not produce much the first season, but it grew many suckers. Should I let the suckers grow so it turns from a single trunk to shrub-like form?
So, all right, so I stopped the sharing there. So, sorry, so you have a tree that is a bush. Can you repeat that question?
They had a tree in a container for 10 years and they just put it in the ground. And the first season it didn't produce much and the main trunk died or didn't do well.
Okay.
And then it had a lot of suckers.
Shrub.
So should they grow it as a shrub or a tree?
Yeah, so fig trees in our area, they don't like to be grown as trunks just because of the winter damage. They'll end up sending suckers more than growing as a single trunk. Single trunk more for like a potted tree, I think, like I mentioned that. So it is a shrub here in our area mainly. So that's where you want to reduce the amount of suckers and maintain maybe 3 or 4 main leaders and focus on that, and just trim all others just to thin them out, to focus more energy into growing figs rather than more branches and leaves.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bass. I'm glad we're recording this because I want to listen to so many
Sure.
things again.
Yeah, again, if anyone has a question, they could contact me via my website, or my nursery is open for for visitors by appointments. Again, if anyone interested, it's about an hour drive from Philly.